So today I'm speaking with Dr. Raymond Lam, professor and BC Leadership Chair in Depression Research at UBC, co-director of the Mood Disorder Center at the David Moafegian Center for Brain Health. Dr. Lam is a world-renowned expert in depression research, particularly seasonal affective disorder, and has published over 500 peer-reviewed articles. His work has been cited over 40,000 times, placing him in the top 1% of researchers in psychiatry and psychology worldwide. So Dr. Lam, it's a huge honor and thank you for joining us.
Very pleased to be here, Tom.
So let's start at the beginning. So you're actually a homegrown success story here. So you completed both your undergraduate degree and your medical school here at UBC, and then did your psychiatry residency before doing a fellowship in San Diego and returning back to UBC. So I want to ask you, what drew you initially to psychiatry and specifically to studying mood disorders?
Well, I was interested in the brain, and so I was trying to decide on whether to specialize in psychiatry or neurology. I got accepted into both programs. At the time, you could apply separately to programs, and in the end, I chose psychiatry because I thought the patients were much more interesting, and because you do a lot of neurology and neuroscience within psychiatry, a little bit harder to do behavioral issues in neurology. So it's still a fascinating area. I came into it because the promise of understanding more about the brain in mental disorders. And we still have, we've come a long way, but there's still a lot farther that we can do. So we're depending on the bright young people like yourself and others on this podcast or video to be able to bring it forward and advance the research.
I want to ask you too, did it kind of, now that you're one of the leading experts on seasonal affective disorder, did kind of that journey in Vancouver, doing your school here with the long, dark, rainy winters, did that influence this focus in any way?
Well, it started when I was a resident, and I read the first paper that was published in 1984 when it was first identified at the National Institute of Mental Health about seasonal affective disorder. These people with winter depression, only with depressive episodes in the winter. And the really fascinating thing was that the light therapy seemed to help them. So we thought we had this really nice etiology of people who didn't get enough light in the winter because the days are shorter. We knew a lot about circadian rhythms and the effect of light on circadian rhythms. And here was a treatment, light therapy, that was directly came from the hypothesis and from neuroscience. So it's a fascinating story. I was really interested in it. In the end, I went down to San Diego to do research on melatonin in a sleep disorders, mood disorders sleep lab in San Diego. And so that's how I got started with light therapy and circadian rhythms. Unfortunately now, you know, we thought it was simple. It's not simple. And it turns out that it might be circadian rhythms, but it might be other things like direct effects of light on neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. And now we know that light therapy doesn't just work for people with winter depression, but also works for non-seasonal types of depression. So again, unfortunately, it wasn't as specific as we had hoped. It wasn't the subtype that we had hoped. And so we're still looking to try to find subtypes that have specific pathophysiologies.
And can you maybe go through what's actually happening in the brain when someone develops seasonal affective disorder? And you kind of developed a dual vulnerability hypothesis, and maybe you could kind of explain what that means in practical terms.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, we understand, you know, seasonal affective disorder, and as you know, affective is just a term for mood. People with seasonal depressions really have, you know, a subtype of depressive disorder where they only have major depressive episodes in the winter, and in the summer they either feel perfectly well, or if they're bipolar, they may switch into a hypomania. The issue is that in terms of our understanding, there's probably two main theories why people get you know, seasonal affective disorder. One of the main theories, of course, is circadian rhythm hypothesis. And that's because we know so much about the biological clock in the brain. which is located in the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus. We know the biological clock, which controls most of our daily rhythms in hormones, sleep, wake, and behavior, needs to be synchronized with light. Light is the strongest synchronizer for a biological clock. And that effect we know is through the eyes and not through skin exposure. So light enters in through the retina. There's a specific pathway that leads from the retina directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus to affect those changes. And of course, now we know a lot about the molecular mechanisms of the biological clock. In fact, the Nobel Prize in Physiology was awarded in 2017 to 3 researchers who figured out the molecular mechanism. It's a very simple feedback mechanism, really just 3 major genes that are responsible for it, and remarkably preserved from 2-celled organisms all the way through humans.
Wow.
So that's one of the main theories, of course, is that because the changes from winter, summer to winter, we have shorter days, that our clock has to adjust to the changing light levels, and that some people can't adjust. So it's like a form of jet lag in which the internal clock is desynchronized from the external environment. And so that's why light therapy helps, because we know that light reset helps to synchronize the clock. These people might need brighter light than most people do in order to do that. That's one reason why we think that morning light is best for people with winter depression, because the timing of light is very important in terms of the effects on the circadian clock. So all of that was very consistent in terms of what we understood about it. Unfortunately, when we actually look at circadian rhythms using the most rigorous methods to measure circadian rhythms, we can't really say that everyone with SAD actually has a disturbance in the circadian rhythm. And it doesn't appear that the effect of light on the circadian rhythm is what is well associated with the therapeutic effect of light as an antidepressant. So because of that, our group and others have looked at other explanations, and there is evidence that light may directly affect neurotransmitters, particularly serotonin and perhaps dopamine. Serotonin is interesting because of all the neurotransmitters of interest. It's the one that has the clearest pattern of metabolism. And so you get low levels of serotonin in the winter and the highest levels in summer. And some PET studies have shown that, in fact, light therapy may help, may affect, serotonin directly in terms of increasing serotonin, kind of the same that our antidepressant medications work. So those are probably the 2 major hypotheses. The other interesting thing is that even though we're talking about winter depression as a subtype of major depressive disorder, we see it as a spectrum of seasonality. And so some people have, a lot of the same symptoms, which predominantly are things like oversleeping, having trouble getting up in the morning, overeating, gaining weight in the winter, feeling sluggish, and lack of energy in the wintertime. Those are symptoms of winter depression, but many people have those symptoms because they notice they don't feel as well in the winter compared to the summer. So we think of it as a kind of a spectrum of seasonality, from some people who have no seasonality. I'm not particularly seasonal myself. To people who have, a lot of these symptoms, but not to the point where it's really interfering with functioning, which is the requirement when we talk about major depressive episodes. To the people with the more severe major depressive episodes where they have other symptoms as well, which include at its worst suicidal ideation. So that's what we mean. There's a kind of a spectrum of seasonality, kind of like a personality characteristic, that some people are more seasonal than others. Now, light therapy seems to help all of those dimensions. So even people with milder winter get benefit from bright light in the morning, the way we use it for winter depression. The dual seasonality, the dual vulnerability hypothesis is something that we came up with because we're interested in the relationship of serotonin and circadian rhythm. So the way we see it is that there are people who have a vulnerability for seasonality, right? They have more problems in the winter, which may be related to a circadian hypothesis. And then people may have a vulnerability to depression, which again, as far as we know, perhaps is related to a vulnerability factor in serotonin metabolism. And so people have, a single vulnerability. They either have, a depressive vulnerability, they may have non-seasonal depressions, or they have a seasonal vulnerability, which means they might have, these milder winter blahs that we're talking about. If people have vulnerabilities for both, then those are the people who end up having what we call seasonal affective disorder, the major depressive episodes in the winter. So that was kind of what we thought about in terms of trying to understand why not everyone shows circadian rhythm disturbances, not everyone shows serotonergic disturbances.
Wow, that's super fascinating, especially the fact that the light therapy doesn't only affect the seasonal affective patients, it also affects patients with just any depressive disorder. So that's a super interesting finding. And I wonder, would you kind of assume that maybe part of this on the circadian side is that if humans, just thinking like if humans evolved near the equator and then rapidly kind of expanded into the rest of the world, maybe a lot of our genes didn't kind of keep up with that. And it kind of left a lot of people kind of lagging behind that circadian clock.
Yeah, I think that's a very good hypothesis, right? Because we know that near the equator, right, the day length from winter to summer is almost exactly the same. There's no variation. And we also know that the prevalence of winter depression, much lower near the equator, increases as you get farther north or south, right, as you get to higher latitudes, up to probably there's a maximum, a plateau around 39 degrees latitude in north. And so that's around Toronto, okay? So, we can't, it's harder to say because there's not as many people up north, right? And there are other stresses up north, right? Isolation effects, etc. Yeah. So it's a little harder to study, but it definitely looks, certainly we know in Canada that there's more seasonal affective disorder than in the United States, for example. And interestingly, epidemiological studies of major depressive disorder in Canada show a seasonal pattern with the lowest levels of major depressive episodes in the summer, highest prevalence in the winter, not counting whether someone has seasonality or not. So this is all types of depression. So it's kind of consistent that way, that there's some differences in terms of latitude that might be related to this, evolutionary process. And, partly it's because, you would think, from an evolutionary perspective, we should be living our lives according to the light-dark cycle, right? And so, we should be slowing down in the winter, right? Conserving energy, sleeping more. And in part it's because, we expect ourselves to function exactly the same way, right? In our modern society, that might be another reason that, it's this form of jet lag. We weren't meant to fly several time zones as well, right? And right. That, leads to problems. So again, I want to be clear that we know light, bright light, affect circadian rhythms. We know that we can shift our rhythms with bright light. For example, we can use it to treat jet lag and shift work. What we don't know is whether that's the key reason that people get depressant.
And maybe you could expand a little bit on that that kind of light point. Like if you were to give advice to students who are struggling with kind of those winter blues, like you said, or seasonal affective disorder in these winter months? What are some kind of evidence-based strategies that they could try?
Yeah, no, for sure. There are some good tips in terms of treating the kind of milder winter blahs. And those include things like spending more time outdoors, because even though light during the day doesn't affect our circadian rhythms that much, it's possible that, you know, getting more light outdoors will be helpful for people. Ties, we know it's all kinds of, you know, depression, and helps with seasonal depression as well, and winter blahs. So, you know, making sure you have regular exercise. Keeping a regular sleep-wake cycle is very important in terms of helping to regulate our circadian rhythms. And then light therapy, you know, that, you know, people can use light therapy if they really are having, you know, some of these symptoms. You know, it's really just 30 minutes in the early morning when you get up. People don't have to be staring at the light, but the effect is through the eyes, so they have to be awake. They can be reading or looking at screens, breakfast, during the time they spend under the lights. Our website, ubcsad.ca, all one word, has a lot of tips and how to get an appropriate light box dose and some instructions for use. And I always tell people, you know, if you're having so many symptoms that it's really starting to interfere with your functioning, whether it's at school or with your relationships or your interests, then probably you should be checked out. And, you know, probably the first place is with family doctor, student health service, just to make sure, because there are other reasons, physical reasons why, you know, people might have these symptoms in the winter time. So, you know, that's the time to get checked out. But if you have milder symptoms, for sure, try some of these tips in terms of improving your winter symptoms.
Totally. And I think it's important for people to know, like you said, you could be reading or eating breakfast or something. You don't have to be staring directly right at the light. And I just want to ask one last question here. Kind of beyond seasonal depression, you're leading the CAN-BIND, which is working to identify biomarkers that predict treatment response in depression. And I think this is a super exciting field, maybe kind of getting into more targeted treatments, almost precision medicine in psychiatry. And so can you explain what you're trying to achieve with this research and why it matters?
Sure. So our Canadian biomarker network, it's been, we just celebrated our 15-year anniversary. So we've been around for a little while. And of course, it came because, you know, we realized of our diagnoses, right? What we call major depressive disorder is such a heterogeneous, all psychiatric actually diagnoses are very heterogeneous conditions. And so it's not just one cause or two causes, you know, there are multiple factors involved. And so we thought the only way we can move forward is to develop predictors of treatment. Right now, our treatments are based on trial and error, whether it's psychotherapy, which is very effective for depression, or medications, or other biological treatments like transcranial magnetic stimulation. We don't really know who's going to get better with which treatment. All of our treatments work for about half the people who use them. And so this idea that, you know, we can try to look for predictors of treatment is very important. It's the holy grail of psychiatry, because we don't have first of all, we don't have objective measures of behavior that we need in order to, right now we kind of depend on self-report and what, you know, interviews of people asking them how they're doing. So we need objective measures, but also we need predictors. And the only way we think we can identify predictors is to look at subgroupings of patients, try to identify biological subtypes of depression that might have some specific symptoms, or more importantly, have specific treatments that address that particular subtype. So that's been our you know, our approach, is to look widely, do deep clinical phenotyping, not just look at one molecule or one imaging type, but to do imaging, EEG, cognitive testing, functional and structural imaging, and then a bunch of molecular tests from GWAS all the way up through all the omics. By doing and look everything together, including things like environmental stressors, personality, childhood adversity, we measure everything. And we put it all together, we give it to smart people in data science to help us try to parse out some of these subtypes. And we have some good candidates in terms of some of these predictors. In fact, we're doing a large trial now to examine an EEG and a clinical symptom predictor that we think will identify who will not respond to a serotonergic antidepressant like escitalopram. And so we have a large trial now to see whether assigning them to a particular treatment based on whether or not they're going to respond to citalopram is going to be better than just randomly assigning people to a particular treatment. We think it'll be helpful. We think it will help change clinical practice if we can identify that, because we're using a portable EEG. So this is something that could be done fairly easily in a clinic. You don't have to send someone to an EEG lab in order to get that done.
That is absolutely fascinating. I mean, I think in psychiatry, it seems like kind of we have these diseases like depression, but it could be such a variety of factors that are causing that disease, and kind of all these things, all these intersections, and the fact that you guys are using these biomarkers, so we have a better idea before we give someone a treatment that may not work and cause side effects that we don't want. Having a better idea of if that treatment is going to work for them before starting them is so vital. So I think that's really
exactly it. It's kind of looking at, it's kind of saying that, depression is like pneumonia, right? It's signs and symptoms, but we know pneumonia has many different causes, viral, bacterial, other causes. And so unless you know the actual cause, trying to treat pneumonia is a losing battle. You're only going to, if you give a treatment like antibiotics, you're only going to treat some percentage of people who happen to have bacterial pneumonia. And so that's the intent, is that we want to try to look at some of that pathophysiology and try to understand what's going on in the brain and target some of those treatments. And we're getting much closer. I think hopefully we're going to get a breakthrough very soon.
Wow, that is so fascinating. I'm really excited to hear about kind of where that lands. Just to be respectful of your time, I think that's kind of where we'll end things off here. So, Dr. Lam, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your time with us today. Your work has helped countless people, and I know that our listeners will find this incredibly valuable, especially as we're navigating these darker months. So, thank you again for talking with me today.
Okay, you're most welcome, Tom. Been a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, take care and happy holidays.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Same to you. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.